Delta Force Hawk Ops is now finally in closed alpha, and with it, a huge influx of players and eyes on the upcoming extraction shooter. In this video, I'm going to give my honest opinions on the game thus far, and for those that are new to my channel, I do typically focus on extraction shooters, so everything from Escape from Tarkov to Call of Duty DMZ. Now, if you're not familiar with the new Delta Force Hawk Ops, it's an upcoming free-to-play shooter on PC and console with a large-scale respawn battlefield-style game mode as well as a fully fleshed-out extraction shooter game mode. The large-scale combat is cool, but my heart is in the extraction mode, so that's really what this entire video is going to be about. So I'm going to start with a big picture look at how I see Delta Force fitting into the genre so far. On one end of the spectrum, you've got Escape from Tarkov, the most detailed and hardcore extraction shooter ever made, with an amazing attention to detail and depth of gameplay. And on the other side of the spectrum, you've got Call of Duty DMZ, the most casual extraction shooter experience, if you can even call it that, where players have virtually no gear fear or long-term interest in gathering and extracting loot. Somewhere in the middle of both of those games is Arena Breakout Infinite, a much more casual extraction shooter, but still heavily represents the core mechanics that make up the extraction genre, with a very real sense of gear fear and player economy. I feel like Delta Force falls in between Arena Breakout and DMZ. And quite frankly, from what I've played so far, it is the most casual but true extraction shooter that we have seen so far. Now, casual extraction shooter is sort of a contradiction of terms to a degree because extraction shooters are typically a little bit more in depth than your average game. But Delta Force, while it has all of those bells and whistles that you're looking for to take a deep dive into, it still remains accessible to the casual player with an abundance of quality of life enhancements. For example, many of the gameplay mechanics that you might see in Escape from Tarkov that may seem tedious, like packing individual magazines or building out a gun in the workshop, are made infinitely easier in Delta Force. That's right, you do not need to have a PhD or 10,000 hours at the real-life shooting range to play and enjoy Delta Force. Now that's kind of the overview. I want to dive into some of the details about the game, and we're going to start with, as I said earlier, both multiplayer modes are free to play on Xbox, PlayStation, and PC. This is absolutely huge, obviously. Not only does it maximize potential player count, but it also gives an incredible gateway into the extraction shooter genre for casual FPS players, many of which never had the time or the patience to give a game like this a shot. But now that it's free to play on all platforms, it gives everyone that opportunity. All right, as you might expect with a game like this, there is a robust loot table that represents hundreds of items, all with different rarities, uses, and values. You've got the most common white rarity items all the way up to the rarest red rarity items that can all be found while looting containers, doing missions, or even loose loot scattered around the maps. Now, to give you an example, a basic white item might sell for 3,000, while the ultra rare red items might sell for excess of 350,000 or even more, into the millions, as we've seen so far in this game. In a game where your personal economy effectively represents your current level of gear fear, there is a rush every single time that you loot. That adrenaline rush is what we like to call dopamine roulette. It's that moment when you're searching an object only to see something so rare and valuable come up, and you're like, oh my god, I gotta get out of here, I gotta extract, I gotta save this thing in my secure container. You just feel this adrenaline rush, and that's what we like to see in these types of games. It's one of the core feelings, in fact, that extraction shooters give a player, and Delta Force delivers in this regard. Valuable loot isn't just for selling and juicing up your bankroll either, but these items can be used for bartering for valuable gear, everything from high quality ammo to high tier armor, and learning these bartering systems can help you get kitted out nicely. And having better gear is going to give you that advantage in your fights, but at an increasing cost. How much of your bankroll are you willing to put on the line before you enter the game? Those that are willing to risk the big dollars on a loadout, they have an advantage in a fight, but you are just one misstep away from losing it all. It's all about risk and reward. There's also a player-driven auction house where players can buy and sell virtually every item in the game, like guns, ammo, armor, and loot. The auction house gives players the flexibility to build out their loadouts exactly how they wish, provided that they have the funds to do so. This is a very big plus for casual players because they now have the ability to get high-end gear at any time versus being at a serious disadvantage against players that grind the game every day. There's nothing more annoying than dying to a player that you feel like you could have killed if you had access to that high-tier ammo that they were using. Well, that hindrance doesn't exist in Delta Force since the auction house unlocks at level 3, which takes no time at all to get to. Another thing that I love about Delta Force is how the loot is distributed on the map. As I said earlier, there's all these different rarities of loot, and the difference in value at the higher tiers is crazy. So being able to realistically find high-end loot is important. In some other extraction shooters, the high-end loot is typically locked behind doors or in incredibly dangerous PvP areas on the map. But in Delta Force, you can find the highest tier loot anywhere on the map. So if you're just a player that doesn't, necessarily seek out PvP, or you're coming in with a low-cost kit, for example, you can still make a really good amount of money, even if you loot some of the less dangerous points of interest. This aspect just makes the game way more accessible to casual players and solo players, as it allows them to maintain a decent bankroll with a more passive playstyle. Now let's just take a second and talk about the gunplay real quick. Delta Force has some very smooth and buttery gunplay similar to Call of Duty. There's not too much recoil and the guns seem to have a very snappy aim down sights. It just makes it feel a lot more accessible. Sometimes with these hardcore shooters, controlling recoil is like nearly impossible. But with this game, everything feels quite smooth, even with a gun that doesn't have all of the best attachments on it. So another thing that casual players are going to enjoy about this game. Those are some of the things I love so far about Delta Force. I am super addicted to the game, but there are some things that we need to talk about. Things that I'm on the fence about and things that are kind of unknown to me. And we're going to start with the cheater situation. So cheaters are everywhere. They're in every game and it only gets worse over time. I think we can all agree on that. Usually when you have a free-to-play game, there's a very big concern that cheaters are just going to run rampant. And with Delta Force, that concern is just as prevalent. Now the game does use a kernel level anti-cheat called Ace anti-cheat, which is the same one you'll find in Arena Breakout as well. Now I'm not an expert in any of these anti-cheats, but I do know that some are better than others. For example, Valorant's Vanguard kernel level anti-cheat versus Call of Duty's Ricochet kernel level anti-cheat, the difference is night and day. Call of Duty's anti-cheat is pretty much worthless and Valorant's is perhaps the best in the business. So you can have two different kernel level anti-cheats and have two dramatically different results, at least from a player perspective. Now where Ace stacks up there, I suppose we'll have to wait and see. Now outside of the anti-cheat software, Delta Force does employ a great feature that will naturally reduce cheaters. The simple feature is that if you squad up with another player and drop any items for them, if those items get extracted by that player that you gave them to, every one of those items will be returned to the original player that brought them in. For example, if I bring in a sniper rifle and I drop it for my squad mate, he extracts with that gun at the end of the raid, and that sniper rifle is going to be returned to me through the in-game mail system. Well, why is that a big deal? Well, historically in games like Escape from Tarkov, cheaters will enter a game, they're going to kill everyone in sight, they're going to loot all of the rarest gear and items on the map, and then sell those items through a third-party website for real money. Cash money, man. And we call that RMTs, or real money transactions. And once someone buys said item, they then queue up with the player that sold it and they drop the item for them in the game. Well, that's not going to work here in Delta Force because the item will just get mailed back to the original owner of the item. It's a pretty elegant solution to combat RMTs. Now, is this going to stop hackers from just flying around the map and killing everyone just for kicks? No. But it does directly impact the RMT cheater market, which should reduce the overall cheater count. So the question that remains is, will the Ace anti-cheat have quality automated detections for hackers to stop them in their tracks early and often? We'll just have to wait and see. Another unknown is if there's going to be pay-to-win mechanics in the game. Some free-to-play games exclusively make their money by selling skins and battle passes, kind of like Fortnite, for example. Other free-to-play games, especially mobile games, like to lock essential progression items and perks behind a paywall, which players end up feeling obligated to buy buy if they want to further their journey in the game. Now, Delta Force does have a battle pass. It's going to have gun skins from what we can tell. But is there any more to it than that? The one thing that jumps out at me is the player's access to the secure container. Now, the secure container is a small box that players can put stuff into prior or during the raid to ensure that if they die, they will not lose these items. So anything in the box stays, even if you die. Now, this is a hugely important mechanic because it allows players to extract required mission items, or even more so, keep very expensive items like ammunition, which can cost hundreds of dollars per bullet depending on the rarity that you go with, and you're keeping those stacks of ammo out of harm's way. Now, in Escape from Tarkov, for example, the size of the player's secure container was dependent on which version of the game that they bought, and they had the opportunity to upgrade that container by completing a long set of in-game missions if they wanted to maybe get the entry-level version of the game. Well, it's not entirely clear how this is going to work in Delta Force, but it does look as though players will have access to a 1x2 size box without having to pay for anything. And larger temporary container upgrades may cost in-game currency in the future. We'll have to see how this one plays out, but I can say that if you do get a 1x2 secure container guaranteed for all free-to-play players, I think this is totally fine. And people can upgrade to bigger size secure containers if they want to pay a monthly fee or something. That's totally fine. At least every single player would have access to it. But if for some reason they decide to make it like a monthly fee for every player if they want to have a secure container, even the smallest size one, then it really starts to become a problem. And then there really is a pay-to-win mechanic in your game. Now, some people might say, oh, well, that's not really a pay-to-win since everyone can still access all of the same items. But just the sheer fact that a player using a secure container can save potential millions on extracted rare items, or even better, millions in high-tier ammo that's not getting lost every time they die, is giving them an endless statistical advantage over a free-to-play player. Yeah, so that doesn't mean that you can't compete against them, but they will have better ammo in more fights more often than a free-to-play player, and that's going to make a difference in the long term. So long story short, I really hope that every single free-to-play player has access to a 1x2 secure container. It'll solve all the problems. If people want to upgrade, that's fine. But really hoping that that's the case. We'll have to wait and see. As well, another unknown. Okay, last thing I want to talk about is how they've implemented AI or bots into the game. When you're playing the game, you have a very clear visual distinction between AI and players. The AI are just always wearing red and black, and the players are in like camouflage. But Delta Force will also have AI-controlled players as well. So what looks exactly like a real human player character model is actually just an AI. So why have AI-controlled players? Well, in concept, it's actually not a bad idea. It helps backfill incomplete teams and matches to make the game always feel alive with action. Now, in the alpha, there really aren't that many players, so it's hard to really understand what the developers' intentions are here. But as of now, there are quite a lot of these player AIs in every single match. Now, is this just because the alpha player count is low? Probably. I would assume that when there is, a much bigger game population, that the game would fill every game with players for the most part. I mean, it also could be because there are 6 maps, each with 2 different difficulties, mind you. So they may want to make sure that the queue times remain reasonable at all times. Also, interesting, I found that when I queued up solo with no squad fill on, which I do a lot actually, and I really felt like I was getting put in lobbies that had more bots and less real players, maybe in an attempt to make things slightly easier since I queued up solo. That's just a guess. I know there's no actual solo queue, and I know a lot of people wish that there was, but potentially the game is seeing that you're queuing up solo and giving you some type of matchmaking parameters that it can determine that's going on there. Hey, this guy's queuing up solo. Let's put him in with more AI and less real players. Once again, another thing we'll have to kind of take a closer look at when the game launches and has a high stable player count. So there it is. All in all, Delta Force is a great extraction shooter where everything is simplified while maintaining the core mechanics of the genre. I'm really excited for the full release of this game, and I definitely plan to cover it on the channel. So let me know down in the comments below if you have any questions about what we've seen so far, what you've heard about the game. I'll answer every single one that I can. Thanks for watching. Drop a sub for more Delta Force extraction content, and I'll catch you in the next one.